The first time Princess Celera of the Valerian Spiral saw a human, she thought he looked unfinished. His skin lacked shimmer, his eyes did not glow, and his presence felt strangely quiet. Yet the court chamber fell silent when he stepped forward, because humanity had a reputation for surviving what should have killed them. Celera was a scholar before she was royalty. Curiosity burned hotter in her than political caution. And when the council allowed her to interview the human envoy, she prepared hundreds of questions about war, resilience, and biology. The human's name was Elias Ward, a cultural liaison sent after the Treaty of Broken Moons. He stood calmly beneath crystalline arches while translators hummed softly. She asked about human lifespans, about their healing, about how they endured loss so rapidly without dissolving into ritual mourning. Then, without realizing the weight of it, she asked the question that froze the chamber. How often do humans mate? Gasps rippled through the court. Valerian nobles fluttered their frilled collars in shock. Such a question was considered deeply private among her people. Mating for Valerians occurred once or twice in a lifetime, tied to planetary cycles and spiritual alignment. Elias blinked, then smiled faintly, not offended, only thoughtful. That depends, he said, on the humans involved. Celera tilted her head, confused. Give me a standard biological average. He paused, glancing at the advisors, then answered honestly. For many humans, bonding can occur weekly, daily, sometimes more, sometimes less. It is not limited to reproduction alone. The chamber erupted into chaos. Translators struggled to keep up, and Celera felt her mind reel. Daily, she repeated silently. Her species required years of recovery after a single bond. In that moment, she realized humanity was not just resilient, they were relentless. And she had only just begun to understand them. Later that cycle, Celera requested a private continuation of the discussion, officially labeled a cultural exchange, unofficially driven by fascination. They sat across from each other in a quiet observatory, stars drifting like slow thoughts beyond the glass. You must understand, Celera said. For Valerians, bonding is sacred. It binds soul to soul. The body cannot endure repetition without harm. Elias nodded. For humans, connection takes many forms: emotional, physical, spiritual, sometimes all at once, sometimes separately. She studied him carefully. Does this not weaken the bond? Sometimes, he admitted, but sometimes it strengthens it. Humans often learn through repetition, through closeness, through shared vulnerability. Celera recorded every word, her bioluminescent markings pulsing softly as she processed the implications. A species capable of frequent bonding would evolve differently. Attachment patterns, emotional endurance, grief cycles, even love itself would follow another rhythm. You are not driven mad by it, she asked. He chuckled. We are driven mad by many things, but this is not usually one of them. For the first time since the war ended, Celera laughed, a sound like wind through crystal leaves. That laugh echoed in Elias' memory long after the meeting ended. Rumors spread quickly through the station: the princess who asked forbidden questions, the human who answered without shame. Some Valerians accused Celera of impropriety, others of brilliance. She did not care. Instead, she invited Elias to observe a Valerian bonding archive, a place where memories of unions were preserved as light and sound. Each of these, she explained, represents a single union. Many died without experiencing more than one. Elias felt the weight of it press against his chest. Humans take this for granted, he said quietly. And Valerians fear it, she replied. They stood together, two species shaped by different limits, realizing neither was superior, only different. That night, Celera documented a new hypothesis. Humanity's strength was not only endurance, but adaptability through connection. They healed faster because they were rarely alone. The council summoned Celera days later, warning her that emotional proximity to humans could blur diplomatic lines. She listened respectfully, then asked one question in return. Is ignorance safer than understanding? No one answered. She continued meeting Elias, their conversations drifting from biology to philosophy, from survival to meaning. He spoke of humans who loved fiercely despite short lives, who bonded not because it was rare, but because time was precious. Celera realized then that frequency did not cheapen connection. It honored it. For the first time, she wondered what her own people had lost in their caution. On the day Elias' mission ended, Celera walked with him to the departure bay. I asked how often humans mate, she said softly, but I think the true answer was something else. Elias waited. You connect often because you must, she continued. Your lives are brief, your universe harsh, you survive by holding each other close. He smiled, eyes warm. That might be the most accurate explanation anyone has given. As his ship departed, Celera returned to her studies, forever changed. Not because of how often humans bonded, but because of why. And across the stars, a quiet truth spread. Humanity endured, not through restraint, but through relentless connection. The departure of the human vessel left a silence that lingered far longer than the echoes of its engines, and Princess Celera found that the silence unsettled her more than the chaos of court ever had. For the first time in her life, knowledge had not brought closure, only expansion. Her thoughts no longer fit neatly within Valerian frameworks of cycle and restraint. She returned to the Hall of Records, a place where decisions of planetary importance were etched into living crystal, and requested access to an archive that had not been opened in over 3 centuries. The keepers hesitated, their luminous forms dimming with concern, because the archive she requested contained records of failed cultural integrations, species that had observed others too closely and lost themselves in imitation or fear. I am not seeking to become human, Celera said gently. I am seeking to understand why we are not. The keepers relented. Within the archive, memories unfolded like slow auroras, civilizations that prized distance, others that collapsed under excess closeness. The balance was always delicate. Yet none resembled humanity. Humans did not merely survive proximity, they required it. Their societies, families, even their wars were shaped by bonds formed again and again under pressure. Celera began to see the pattern clearly. Where Valerians evolved limits to protect the self, humans evolved repetition to protect the whole. This realization led her to propose something unprecedented. A joint research initiative not focused on reproduction, not on diplomacy, but on connection resilience. The Council resisted at first, arguing that such studies risked cultural contamination. Celera countered with data, with projections, with the cold clarity of a scholar who had learned warmth from another species. Our birth rates decline, she said. Our isolation grows, we survive longer, but we live less together. Humanity thrives not because they bond rarely, but because they recover quickly from loss through new bonds. One elder finally spoke, their voice resonating through the chamber. And what if we cannot recover? Celera answered honestly. Then we will fade carefully, with dignity, but without legacy. The initiative passed by a narrow margin. And so the Valerian spiral prepared for the arrival of human researchers, sociologists, psychologists, artists, not soldiers, not diplomats, but connectors. When the first human delegation arrived, Celera noticed something immediately. They touched constantly. A hand on a shoulder, a brief embrace, shared laughter that closed distance without ceremony. The Valerian attendants stiffened at first, uncertain how to interpret these gestures. Elias had warned her of this. During their final conversation he had said, "We signal safety through closeness." Now she saw it in motion. The human lead researcher, Dr. Mara Chen, explained it simply. "We are born helpless," she said, Connection is our first survival skill. Celera escorted them through the palace, observing how Valerian architecture, designed to emphasize personal space, felt cold to the humans. They adapted quickly, gathering closer during discussions, rearranging seating without offense. Valerians observed quietly, and something unexpected happened. Some Valerians felt relief. One young aide admitted in a private report that standing closer reduced her cycle anxiety. Another noted improved focus during collaborative tasks. The findings shocked the medical council. Celera did not gloat, she listened. Understanding she had learned from humanity was not about victory. It was about adaptation without erasure. During a joint symposium, a Valerian philosopher posed the question that changed everything. If humans bond so often, how do they endure separation? Dr. Chen did not answer immediately. Instead, she invited a human engineer to speak, a man who had lost his partner during the war. He spoke softly. "I didn't endure it," he said. "I broke. Then others stepped in, friends, family, strangers. They didn't replace her. They helped me carry the absence." Celera felt the truth of it resonate through her bioluminescence. Valerians carried loss alone. Humans distributed it. That night, Celera dreamed of a Valerian child, not standing alone beneath the stars, but surrounded by many hands, none permanent, all meaningful. Weeks turned into cycles, cycles into seasons. The research expanded into education, into conflict resolution, into grief counseling. Valerian youths began forming temporary bonds sanctioned by the council, not reproductive, not permanent, simply connective. The results were undeniable. Lower mental fatigue, faster recovery from stress, increased creative output. Still, not all were pleased. A conservative faction accused Celera of eroding Valerian identity, of inviting chaos masked as warmth. They petitioned for her removal from the initiative. The council summoned her once more. This time, Celera did not bring data alone. She brought testimony. A veteran who no longer dreamed of isolation chambers. A scholar who had written her first collaborative thesis in centuries. A healer who said fewer patients requested stasis retreats. When Celera spoke, her voice carried no defiance, only clarity. "We asked how often humans mate," she said, "but what we learned is how often humans choose each other." Silence followed. Then the elder, who had once questioned recovery, spoke again. "Princess," they said, "what do you choose?" Celera paused. She thought of Elias, of his smile, of a species that lived quickly and loved repeatedly, not because they were careless, but because they were brave. "I choose continuity," she said, "not of form but of meaning." The vote was unanimous. The initiative became permanent. Years later, historians would mark this period as the quiet bloom, the era when Valerians did not change their biology, but expanded their emotional ecology. As for Elias Ward, he received reports from afar, updates that made him smile during long journeys. One message, sent through a private channel, stood out. "You were correct," Celera wrote. "Connection is not weakened by frequency, it is strengthened by intention." He replied simply, "I'm glad you found your answer." She responded, after a long pause, "I found more than that." In the generations that followed, Valerian children learned of humans not as reckless maters or biological anomalies, but as a species that taught the galaxy a difficult lesson. That survival was not only about how long one could endure alone, but about how often one dared to reach out. And in the quiet between stars, where empires rose and fell, one truth endured. Life persisted not through silence, but through shared presence. Time moved differently after the quiet bloom, not faster, not slower, but fuller, and Princess Celera found that her days no longer felt like isolated points along a rigid cycle. They felt connected, like stars forming constellations only when viewed together. Valerian society did not transform overnight. Restraint was still honored, solitude still respected, but the fear surrounding closeness began to loosen its hold. Spaces once designed for single occupancy were redesigned with optional convergence chambers, halls where individuals could gather briefly without ritual or obligation, simply to exist near one another. At first, usage was cautious, then habitual, then natural. Celera often observed from the upper terraces, watching Valerians pause in these spaces, exchange words, sometimes silence, sometimes laughter, and then separate again without depletion. Connection without permanence. Bonding without sacrifice. The scholars called it adaptive proximity. The people called it breathing together. Human advisors were gradually reduced as Valerians learned to guide themselves, yet human influence remained woven into the culture in quiet ways. Hand gestures once considered intrusive were reinterpreted as signals of trust. Shared meals became common during long deliberations. Even morning practices evolved, no longer solitary vigils, but collective remembrance cycles. One such cycle marked the anniversary of the Treaty of Broken Moons. Celera was asked to speak, not as a princess, but as the one who had asked the first forbidden question. She stood before Valerians and humans alike, her markings glowing with a steady calm. "We once believed rarity preserved meaning," she said, "that what happened only once must matter more than what happened often." She paused, letting the idea settle. Humans showed us another truth. Meaning is not preserved by scarcity alone. It is preserved by care. The audience remained still, attentive in a way that had once been reserved only for ritual declarations. After the address, Celera walked through the gardens where she had first questioned Elias weeks after his arrival so many cycles ago. The stars were the same. She was not. A Valerian child approached her hesitantly, accompanied by two elders. "Highness," the child said, "is it true humans choose many bonds?" Celera lowered herself to the child's level. "Yes," she replied, "and they choose how to honor each one." The child considered this. "Will we be like them?" Celera smiled softly. "No," she said, "we will be ourselves with more room inside." Far beyond the Valerian spiral, Elias Ward read about these changes during a long transit between frontier systems. The reports were dry, academic, filled with metrics and sociological models. Yet between the lines, he felt something rare. Hope not born of victory, but of understanding. He recorded a private log that day. "We often think our strength is our endurance," he said, "but maybe it's our willingness to share the weight until endurance becomes unnecessary." Back on Velara Prime, Celera prepared for a transition of her own. She would soon relinquish her formal title, not abdication, but evolution, stepping into a role newly created by the Council Cultural Continuity Steward. It was a position without command, without authority, designed to listen across generations and species. Some questioned the need. Others understood immediately. On her final day as acting princess, Celera visited the Hall of Records one last time. She added a single entry, concise, unembellished. The inquiry into human bonding frequency led not to biological revision, but to philosophical expansion. She hesitated, then added one more line. "Connection is a renewable resource." When she exited the hall, she did not do so alone. Several Valerians walked beside her, not attendants, not guards, simply companions for the distance between chambers. No one remarked on it. That was the true measure of change. Years later, long after Celera's luminescence dimmed with age, Valerian students would study this era not as a scandal nor as a revolution, but as a correction. A moment when a civilization realized that survival did not require less feeling, but wiser feeling. And across the galaxy, among species who would one day face the same quiet question of isolation versus closeness, the story endured. Not as a warning, but as an invitation to ask without fear, to answer without shame, and to remember that sometimes the most powerful change begins not with conquest or catastrophe, but with a single honest question, asked at the right moment and answered openly.